should have individual historians before, but never a committee. So this committee has been working very we have some very good people on it. We've been working very hard. We're very happy with what we have accomplished, and we want to tell you a little bit about it. First, I'd like to introduce Diane Fisher, who's going to tell us about a very appropriate subject, the history of opening day.
Could you speak up a little?
Alrighty, as Bill said, I'm Diane Fisher, staff Commodore in the year 2000. And I joined the club in 1992, and that year I decided I'm going to join a committee, and I joined the opening day committee. So, it's my passion, I love it, and it has quite a history. Now this, I think you'll see up here, is a program that was actually developed in 1888, opening day, because we did have opening day on the bay, even though it was here in Corinthian Island. And you'll notice on top of the burgee, there's a little pelican. You'll see him up there. So you will see some of our artifacts around here with the 1888 logo. It's not when we were formed, which was of course 86, but we do use this logo a lot. So opening day actually started in about the 1880s and really became very popular in the 1890s. What you see here is the original hand-drawn bridge. Now, it's kind of hard to get an idea from the viewpoint of this, but this is actually Corinthian Island here. Below the next slide, we can show you a picture of the Corinthian Yacht Club, and tucked behind Corinthian Island is this drawbridge. And if you can imagine, you had a little spit coming out from Main Street that connected us to Tiburon, and the Corinthian had like a catwalk to get to it originally. You can see us on the end here, and the Tiburon little spit here, but all that area back there is water on both sides of the island. And the drawbridge is actually tucked behind the Corinthian Island. And that was actually the opening day that was started mostly in the 1880s and 90s, that the yachts, the boats that went from winter, protection from the winter storms. Remember, there was just our club, there were no breakwaters, there were no harbors around here, so they needed refuge in the winter. And in March, we would have opening day on the bay. They would draw that drawbridge up, and the yachts at high tide, because it was very shallow, had to come out of the island, from behind the island in the lagoon, and come out and anchor. Now, Corinthian Yacht Club, because we are at the end of a big rock, we used to lower down our little dinghies and boats from this area up here down Ammonia Alley. We'd lower them down so that the yachtsmen, the boat owners, could row out to their yachts and go back and forth. And they were lowered actually down from our club. So that was opening day in the bay in March. Yeah, this was a little surprise. This is for a little later. So, actually, it's so much fun to read some of these old articles that we're finding. But I have to read this one, because this was written in the 1890s. It says, opening day, the official ending of the winter hibernation of yachtsmen. The time when the yacht owners awakened and pounced upon their boats with enthusiasm, similar to that of schoolboys in the summertime. So there was a great deal of enthusiasm in March. Now, as you all know, Corinthian Yacht Club was a men's club. But in March, on opening day, the women were allowed to come. They were allowed to see the boats come out of the lagoon, get anchored in the harbor here, but they had to leave by 5 o'clock. At 5 o'clock is when all the liquid food came out. So the men could enjoy their dinners, which you'll find there's menus over here that are from some of our annual meetings. They labeled every menu item, but they ate and drank after 5 o'clock when the ladies were gone. Now also on opening day, because as I say, it was during the winter when the boats were all in the lagoon, they had closing day, and then all the boats would go back on high tide. And that was in October. So closing day was in October, and the ladies were allowed on that date. But they had to leave by 5. So, and also, I don't know if any of you have heard Chris Canada talk about a little shanty, sea shanty that her father brought forward. I guess it happens at Cooks and Waiters. I wouldn't know because I've never been to a Cooks and Waiters. But there is a little sea shanty that her father taught her, and they sang at all the, my understanding is they sang at all the Cooks and Waiters thing. And it starts out high tide, low tide, all around the bay. The yachts, they are so cozy, and the yachtsmen are so gay. And this was something that they came out, there's a whole, like many more stanzas and verses to it. So anyway, this went on in the 1880s, 1890s, early 1900s. And in 125 years ago, we were founded in 86, and in 1896, we were one of the founding yacht clubs of the Pacific Interclub Yachting Association, which was founded in 1896. What they saw was our opening day of the bay. So Corinthian again was a leader because PICYA at that time, you know, when they were formed, decided they wanted to have a parade of boats because when all these boats would come out in the harbor, and they're all anchored out here, they're anchored out here, and then there would be a parade of what they call the little white sails that go all the way down to Sausalito and over the city front. And so the PICYA in 1917, which happened to coincide with a rebuilding of our drawbridge. They did a much larger drawbridge. It was much more processional out from the lagoon. And in 1917, they had their first decorated boat parade. And opening day on the bay was born, again, led by the Corinthian Yacht Club. Now, this opening days were done through the decades, and the only time opening day wasn't actually done was in World War II, World War I, and World War II. It was done during the Depression, and of course, last year we didn't have it either, 2020, because of COVID-19. So opening days have been celebrated since the 1880s. Again, the Corinthian Yacht Club and the leadership that and very creative minds that we have here. In 1963, Jenny White and then Vice Commodore Charlie White were coming up from Monterey and saw the Catholic blessing of the working fishing vessels. And she said, well, why can't we do that for the pleasure crafts? So he brought it back to the board, and they thought, oh, this would be a great idea. And then we had a very well-known member, Captain Elmer Toll, who was able to secure the Navy for us. So the first year it was done on a private 50-foot Stevens yacht. And after that, the Navy got involved. The USS Thrasher was the first one in 1965, I believe, was the first time the Navy got involved, and it was a community effort. The transport vessels would line up right in our harbor here, and people from Tiburon and Belvedere and all the community were invited to come, and they'd line up down the Pneumonia, right down there all the way out, and they'd have lines out on Main Street to come and board these vessels, and they would be taken out to the Navy vessels. It was like a family day out there. They were able to tour and see these. So it's a big community event. And the blessing hosted probably somewhere any given year, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 boats. So as you see, this is just an example of it, of what our opening days look like. And in the 1980s, I'm going to bring you to 1983, it was huge. Parties. I think we have a slide up here. You saw Sam's. People would jump off the decks at Sam's. And people in various layers of clothing, optional, were also on the boats. But it was a big, big party and a big deal in the community. And the Navy did this for us, supplied the blessing vessel for 29 years until 1964. And then in 1965, the Navy pulled out of the Bay Area, so we went to the U.S. Coast Guard, and we had the first U.S. Coast Guard under Monroe. And they did it for us for about 14 years. They supplied us with a vessel for the blessing, and to have the clergy up there blessing the vessels. And the clergy would be on the boats supplied by both the Navy and then the Coast Guard. And then in 2009, we went back to the original concept of a private yacht. And we had Captain Doug Owen and his wife, Andrea Owen, on Anna Kalia, and this year we'll have Jerry Camillo, so he's going to be doing Aurora 5. He's done it for a few years now. But I want to take you to 83. There was a handsome young man on a boat here. And in 1983, the USS Kiska was the blessing vessel. And I have, and there you see, yachtsman Peter Birnbaum. Where are you, Peter? And here you read
That's
this.
not my head.
Oh, there you go. That's Opus 1. He was doing some bright work on there. And you'll see here they're letting us know up to 5,000 vessels are going to be up there that day. And that's when the days when this thing was just, the opening day was the party of the year on the bay. So we have now hosted the opening of the blessing of the pleasure craft on opening day for 58 years. Once again, the Corinthian Yacht Club was leader, and we created organizations and races and cruises and events on the bay. And we've just been, the creative minds of our fellow Corinthians have really perpetuated over the years. So here you can, I think this is in 84. This is a picture taken in 84. So right now we're going to have the Aurora 5 be our blessing vessel, and we hope to see you on Sunday, opening day. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane. Next, I'd like to introduce Lynn Sellers, who's going to tell us about the history room. Lynn?
Oh, okay. Rearranged in order of speaking, so I had to wake up. Yeah, the history room is about to come into full-blown existence from the incredible generosity of the Commodore family. John and Rosalind Commodore made a request to the club so we could have a history and artifacts room. We had none prior to their gift. John Commodore was a Commodore of the club twice, I think, in addition to port captain, the head of 14 committees. What a lot of people didn't know is he was a club historian for nearly 30 years. We put together a library downstairs to that. Most of the artifacts in this club were moved to a locker down in Pneumonia Alley, or what used to be Pneumonia Alley. Yeah, a lot of lockers down there, cold, damp, not good for storing material. I was going through that locker one day, got very upset at the condition of a lot of things, told a group of my colleagues at lunch about how terrible it was, and talked them into joining me, leaving the dining room, going down to the locker, which was right next to the dinghy racks. And while standing there, I'm showing a scrapbook of something, and it's like God intended it. Water burst out of the ceiling. It soaked the scrapbook. We looked up, turns out that we were right under the bar, we were right under the washing machine, and in that minute, one of the pipes burst. Suddenly, everybody from that group was convinced we had to do something about the artifacts in the club. And because of John and Rosalind, we were able to get started. Now, the room right over there used to be the accounting office. Should make it plural, offices. 2 people were up there in these 2 tiny little rooms. Well, when we threatened the club board about a history room, they acquiesced, and that was turned over to us. First thing we've done so far is knock down the wall, took out a supporting stanchion because of Jeff McQueen, an engineer and staff Commodore. He designed a system where we put in a beam up there, everything's secure, everything's safe. We have looked at systems for keeping the moisture out of the room, safely storing documents, what kind of stuff. We put all of that together, and in the meantime, we started going through our artifacts, our documents, the scrapbooks, newspaper clippings, photos, everything that was stored away all over this club. We've centralized it. Most of it's in that room right there, and we've spent 6, 8 months reading every week and going through the artifacts and discovering really interesting stuff. I mean, there are things in there, you start reading a newspaper article, we're supposed to be categorizing. 2 hours later, you're still going through each clipping because some of them are fascinating. I mean, very quickly, last week before, we discovered the rocking chair regatta. I've been remember this club for 30 years. I didn't know anything about it. There were a set of regattas held on the porch, started on the porch. That room, the sunroom now, used to be an outside porch with stairwells on both ends, open and exposed. They put rocking chairs up there for this regatta. Anywhere from 5 to 8 skippers were in the chair, a la Le Mans. The gun sounds, they have to get up, run down the stairs, down to the docks, get their dinghy, row to the boat, get their boat loosened and go around 2 turning points. Landing Cove. Little research turns out that's Point Belvedere. And from thence, Goat Island. Nowadays known as Purple Land. That was the second mark. Come back, anchor their boat, get in that dinghy, come back here, run up the stairs, sit in the rocking chair, bam, finishing gun. They did that for several years. The history committee is going to write a suggestion to the race committee. Can't we do it again? Anyway, so the room is in process. We are now looking at furnishings, tables, shelves, what kind, where, how, that sort of stuff. We're leaving the final choices to Rosalind because she's paying for it. So we're going to let her choose whatever she wants, as long as it's reasonably nautical. So the room is almost ready to go. There is, in terms of storage, and this is how good things happen sometimes, there's a little attic above that room. Pull down ladder, you go up in the attic. It's standing headroom with shelves. That's where our documents go. We've got room for all of that, and then downstairs we have room for the trophies and photos and all of that other stuff. It's going to take a while. We still have a lot of work to do, but we are quite excited about what happens when 6 months from now you go to take a look or are curious about a bit of club history. You go up those stairs into that room, and so help me, we're going to make sure you can find what you're looking for. Thank you.
Next, I'd like to introduce 2 people. Commodore and you to her mom to tell us about the interviews of the old members that they have been doing. What do you think?
So I'm Buddha, and been a member here since 1969, so I think I'm starting to feel a little bit like the artifacts. But really knew that for years, I've been talking about doing some oral history, actually not alone myself, but other members. So I was invited on the committee by Will, when we formed this committee, to do it didn't become oral history anymore. Now it was when Mike's help became the audio, visual taping. So what we did, we looked at our members going back as far back as we could. Most of them, of course, like members. So what we did, we the first interview we did was with life member George participants and John Wood. And what we did, that was in September of 1918. That was pretty much what we were able to do on the committee because we didn't have a room we could start on. Everything was down below, as Lynn just said, but the interviews we could do. And as we went through, we realized how easy it was to talk to these members for about an hour. Interesting histories that came out. It's on tape right now. We went probably once a month. We would do the interview. We have done 18 by now, and of course it's an ongoing project. So Tom, I think you would continue.
Yeah, for me, being Ross and I are relatively new members, being members since 1996, or 2006, it was very educational for me. I mean, we learned a lot, and you know, you start out an interview, it's really more of a conversation. You know, ask some basic questions. When did you join? And why did you join? And what was your first experience with the club? And then it evolves. It evolves into different stories. Like I learned about the fact when we had went through some difficult financial times, we actually created some bonds that members bought. And that kept us afloat, not having to go, you know, borrow more money or assess members. Things like that were very interesting. Memorabilia, artifacts were brought that we've been collecting now. And what I realized is, and not surprisingly, this old lady, I think you can say, is 135 years old, so there's a lot of texture. And this really comes out in these interviews, in these conversations. I really encourage you to listen to them when you're having trouble going to sleep. In particular, I thought the conversation we had with Hans and Sally was particularly poignant, and I encourage you to listen to that one in particular. But they were all good, and everyone has a different bent, a different angle. And I think it will only make you appreciate the club even more to at least tune in on some of these, as we'll discuss later on. These are all readily available, and we'll talk about how you can do that. But it was a fun event, a little bit bittersweet. Some of the people we've talked to are no longer with us, and that's something that you've got to deal with. And it slowed us down a little bit this past year, but we're just about to ramp up and start doing some more of the interviews shortly. So stay tuned.
Thank you, Tom. I'm going to ask you to stand up again and tell us about your Virgie project.
Sure. Yeah, as I mentioned, the texture is really something. And as you walk around, we probably have north of 150 Virgies, probably closer to 200. And it's really important to mention that Sally and Hans, a few years ago, sort of did an inventory of these Virgies. And for those new to it, it's Virgie, not Bergie. Bergie's a beer. So I thought, well, maybe we need to identify these or somehow make them a little, they're pretty high up there, pretty hard to see. So what I did was I went through the list that was compiled by Sally and Hans, and then what we've done is I've organized them by region. So we've got, you know, the environs of California, the East Coast, we've got the Pacific Rim, Europe, and it's pretty interesting when you look at these. They're truly works of art. I encourage people, it also is a measure of the fact that we've got a lot of people in this club that travel. And it's not uncommon for them when they traveled, when they were traveling and will be traveling again, to take the Corinthian Virgie with them and trade. And so we certainly encourage, when you're out and about, if you see that we're missing Virgie from somewhere. It's sort of a fun way to do it, a fun thing to do. And if you've used your reciprocity at all, and I know many of you have with other yacht clubs, the camaraderie is almost immediate. It's really wonderful. And so this is just sort of an aspect of that. And again, these are all posted on our website, so you'll be able to go through if you're curious and like to look at birches while you're having a burger. So anyway, that's what the Burgee story is all about.
Thank you. Now I'm going to bring back Yuta again to tell us about her work with the telltales.
Yes. The Telltales, our newsletter. The very first newsletter was called Commodore's Letter, and that is from 1940. And what it's saying is, bring on a fireside. I feel the chat coming. So here we are. So I have been collecting telltales since 1940, and the very last one we have in the paper form is from 2013. Fortunately, a lot of our members kept them at home and brought them to the club. So right now, I will say, if any of you have any telltales at home and want to donate them to us, please do, because we do have some missing. What I have been looking through the telltales, it was a little bit like Len. I want to sort them out, I want to put them together, but then I go, oh my God, this is fun. This is like going, I can't say memory lane, but it is like going down memory freeway. Because again, having been here since '69, there are so many memories and pictures that it's fun. So what we have done, we have, actually the early one was called Commodore's Letter, and that was 1940. Then they became C/C Coconut Wireless in 1948. And the first telltale under the name Telltale that we have is from June of '51. What we have done is, by now I have scanned them. So I have scanned 190 telltales. That's what we have between 1940 and 2013. The 190 scanned telltales, with Mike's help, are going on the C/C history. You can look it up. It's absolutely fascinating to look at them, see the pictures. And what we will do is, of course, continue to scan. There will be more to come. And, but again, please, if you have some at home, please bring them to the club and we will add them into the collection. And do look on cychistory.org. The ones who are there, it's great reading. Thank you.
Thank you, Yuta. Now I would like to talk about another project that we have completed. That is the Commodore's picture boards down in the hallway. They have been completely redone with new frames, new matting, and new orientation. But that brings up another subject, one of our mysteries. One of the Commodores was missing, going back to 1913. Now, we've known for some time that this gentleman's picture was missing from the picture boards, but we didn't know why. It was missing in such a way that the Commodore for the year previous, 1912, get some The reason that they left his picture out and covered it up by indicating that the previous Commodore was 2 years, but that's just plain not correct. So I'm going to encourage you to look on our new website, which you'll hear about in a couple minutes, from Mike Egan. Look on our website and look up the story of Harry Picker, which is all there for you. Now I would like to introduce Walt Johnson. Walt has recently rejoined the club. He was a member when he was a younger man. His father, Irving Johnson, was a member for many years back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, and was very involved with the racing organizations. Walt's grandfather, George Harvey, was a life member back beginning in 1910. So Walt has a long history of having his relatives here in the club. Walt now lives up near Sacramento, so he doesn't get here very often, but we're happy that he's rejoined the club. I want to introduce Paul, who will tell us about another mystery, the fire.
Thank you. And as Will said, my family history with the Corinthian goes back to about 1907, I believe, when my grandfather first appears in pictures with his boat with the Burgee on it. So I know he's a member by then. And in fact, the pictures are in the hallway here. He had a little runabout that is shown in some pictures that are posted to the club. And it was in fact my awareness of some of the pictures that had been posted on the club's site that interested me in coming down and talking to the club about my family history and all the artifacts, photographs, and things that I have about that. And after looking at what I had, they said, well, you should join the club and join the history committee. So here I am. And I really enjoy it. As Bill said, I was a junior member back in the 60s. Then life took me other places, and now we're able to be back. I actually was probably in the club here before I was born, since my parents were both life members. And I know I was born the day after they won a race, sailing. So I was here in the spirit. So the first thing I want to talk about is a mystery that Will proposed to me. My interest in the history work was starting in the early days of the club, back when my grandfather joined, and in particular looking at the membership lists back then. And one of the challenges we have is that it's pretty well known, in quotes, that the old clubhouse burned down. If you look at any of the histories of the club, including one on our own history site, and another example, the CYA site, there are references to the fact that the old clubhouse burned down, and we built this lovely one to replace it. But the timing doesn't seem to look good. Go on to the next slide. Well, it's very plausible that the club did burn because Tiburon burned frequently. You may not know, but Tiburon burned down the main street of Tiburon in 1890. Did it again in 1906, not related to the earthquake and fire, but 6 months later. And in 1921, again, this is a picture after the 1906 fire that it wiped out most of the main street. So the fact that the club burned down at some point, being a wooden structure of that age, and in those days when firefighting wasn't terrific, that would be the kind of thing you would expect. Go on. But I've spent a lot of time looking at the newspapers and things from the early days of the club, looking for information about membership. The problem with membership is that we only have 2 rosters, one from 1897 and one from 1910. They're lovely little published books, but there are no rosters for anything in between. So trying to establish who the members were back year by year in those days was something that I was taking on as a challenge. If you'd like to see those little directories, by the way, they're over on the table there. We have some of our But in looking through all that information and looking at the newspapers to try to reconstruct some of this history, there is no reference to a fire in the clubhouse at all. And because the clubs, as Diane indicated, were significant features of the entertainment of the day with opening day and things like that, there was publications all the time about the activities of the club. Every time they'd go on a cruise, have a regatta, it was always in the paper. If the clubhouse had burned, you would expect there to be a story in the newspaper. Well, also there's a story from the last day that the old clubhouse was occupied. There's a story about the old members looking back wistfully on the building that was about to be torn down to construct this building. So clearly the old clubhouse hadn't burned down because there was nothing to be looking at. So the confusion comes from the 1910 directory, which is over there, where it says in a little note before the membership listing in the directory, it says, the earliest membership records have been destroyed in the fire. Well, what fire? The building was still here. Right. So, having spent a lot of time looking at the old papers, go on and next slide. And I think the fire is this one. The Great Earthquake and Fire in San Francisco. There was no fire in the clubhouse, I don't believe. Remember that this is the Corinthian Yacht Club of San Francisco. That's the name of the club. It was established in San Francisco. It was incorporated in San Francisco. The annual meetings were held in San Francisco. The annual dinners were held in San Francisco. Everybody lived in San Francisco. The clubhouse here was just a sort of a weekend getaway that you had to take the ferry to get to, remember. It was not where the common middle-of-the-week meetings would have occurred because it was a pain to get here. You'd go for the weekend, maybe, but, yeah. So, we know that in 1906, the club secretary, Walter Crowell, who was an insurance agent, insurance broker, his offices were in California, on California Street, downtown, the financial district. That was all wiped out in the fire, in the Great Fire. And anyone who has relatives, as I do, that I could talk to who had lived through the experience, San Franciscans never called it the earthquake and fire. They knew, the ones that lived through it, that the earthquake damaged San Francisco. The fire destroyed it. So they always simply called it the fire. And if you are reading anything from the 1906 through the next 5 or 10 years, if somebody says, this happened in the fire, before the fire, after the fire they mean is the 1906 fire. So I believe the Corinthian records that were lost were being held in San Francisco by the officers, by the secretary, whoever, and those were the destroyed records, and the clubhouse never burned. So this not only corrects a lot of misunderstanding, but I think it makes a sense for what we're looking for. And we're finding now, as we dig through some of the material that's coming out of the archives here, we're discovering some of the old ledgers and some other sorts of things that I think are going to help us reconstruct just how much was actually lost in this. And I'm hopeful now, we also have some of the board meetings and things from the early days, minutes from those meetings. We're going to be able to reconstruct a much better, much clearer history with a clearer understanding of what may have actually happened back in the early days. So that's the first mystery that I want to talk to you about. The second one is a surprise you're ending to. Okay, one. In the early part of the century, actually even before that, in 1884, the Pacific Yacht Club, which was a very old yacht club, which was dying about the time Corinthian was organized, they sponsored a race to Santa Cruz, from San Francisco to Santa Cruz. And that was done once. About 12 years after that, the people in Santa Cruz wanted to promote and encourage more activity, particularly I think in the late season, in the August sort of time frame in Santa Cruz. So they suggested to the Bay Area Yacht Clubs in 1908 that they consider a race to Santa Cruz. Corinthian had already scheduled a cruise to Santa Cruz, just as an interesting activity. But the promoters, if you will, in Santa Cruz offered some trophies and turned it into a race. They invited all the clubs in the Bay Area to come down as part of this race and take part. Corinthian stepped up, or you might say interposed itself, as the organizer at this end for that, and coordinated the first of the modern series of Santa Cruz races, which occurred in 1908. We have a trophy, the third place trophy is over on the table over there, from the 1908 race, is one of the artifacts. every year after that, Corinthian organized the race at this end and would go down. And it was a big deal in Santa Cruz. There would be a whole week of festivities. There'd be 3 or 4 other races they would do while they were down there. These were spectator events. People would go out. There were 2 piers in Santa Cruz in those days. People could go out into the bay and watch the boats. And it was a very big deal. And the people in Santa Cruz were very appreciative of Corinthian's efforts in this regard. On the 1910 week in Santa Cruz, they got a bunch of the Corinthians together, took them up into the redwoods behind Santa Cruz, up into where the big trees, which is now the Henry Cowell Redwood State Park, and they identified and dedicated one of the giant redwood trees there to Corinthian Yacht Club. And I ran across a story that said that. I thought, well, that's pretty curious. I wonder if that tree is still there. So I looked up whether or not there's a tree, and what I found was that I could buy a postcard of the tree. The postcard's over there. I think I have a picture of it here. Yeah, this is a picture of the postcard, which is over on the table there, published in 1910 or thereabouts. This is the dedication plaque on the tree in Santa Cruz. So we know that they actually did that as a thank you to the Corinthian for organizing, as Diane had mentioned, Corinthian was a leading club in those days. So we were taking a leadership role here, and it was greatly appreciated. Now we're trying to find out where the tree is and if it still exists. So there's still mysteries to be solved. That's my second story. Thank you.
Happy Earth Day. Thank you all. Now I'm going to introduce Mike Egan, who is our tech guy on the committee. Mike is he's digitizing files and creating websites and doing all kinds of stuff that I'm going to ask him to tell you about, because an old guy like me, I can't understand that stuff. Mike?
We have our own website, cychistory.org, and we have so much information to share, and we have this tiny room. So we're going through a process of digitizing it and making it really easy to look at. We did what's called a wireframe website, which means it works on your phone, it works on your iPad, it works on your PC. And we've linked in our video website, which is a YouTube site, our photos, which is SmugMug, just like standard easy stuff for people to add to and integrate with. And this is the central point that links everywhere. So it's really easy to add content, it's really easy to maintain. All the videos, the member interviews that were talked about before are there. We have 138 subscribers already. The SmugMug, there are photos out there of regattas. We can merge all of those in very easily now. We've taken Utah's tailtails and we've scanned them in a real easy way to look at. You can click on it and it'll turn the pages for you. And we keep adding information exponentially. So check it out. It's a repository. It's a work in progress. It's probably 10 times better than anything else out there, but it's going to be even better. And let me just show it to you real quick, because we want to get Will to do some Q&A stuff, because he knows everything about this place. So let me just show it to you. It works on all the browsers, PC, Mac, all that stuff. See, I did all this without the internet.
I know
It's an old computer, but
Well, the old days, there was no one doing it, it just happened. There was no.
So yes, this time.
I think one of the Check up this file.
They'll figure it out. Sometimes I can't figure it out. It's another world.
okay, we're in. Yeah, so some of the fun stuff, if you look at
Very nice.
history articles, you can read about Harry Pickard, the mystery Commodore. If you look at the video channel, it's linked in to all of the member interviews, which is kind of nice. They're almost right there. Crusty over here. And we also have some fun stuff like member events that people have given us VHS tapes and we digitize them. So there's a lot of really cool stuff in there. And the telltales, we're grouping them. If you want to look at something from the 1960s, you can just click on it. You can zoom in, you can flip the pages, you can do all kinds of stuff with it. And you can actually hear the pages flip. So there's a lot of cool stuff going on. Check back with it, we keep adding stuff to it all the time. So, Will, I think the Q&A.
There's a couple of things. First, I mentioned.
Is that tied to the club days?
Hold on. I wanted something I forgot to tell you about is that Henry Fisher's picture is no longer missing. It's now on the board.
Just come today by Diane. Is Moshe?
Introduced, not all the members of the committee, but the ones that are here, but there's two that could not be here today. Shalene Wood, who is the daughter of John Wood, which you've been around a while, I'm sure you've met John Wood, who's one of our older members who's now living over in the Redwoods in Mill Valley. The other one who could not make it today is Brooke Halsey. Brooke is on the board of the Belvedere Landmark Society, and he's our liaison to that group. We're sorry that we couldn't be here today, but that's the way it is. Okay, are there any questions anybody has for the committee?
Will, Diana, Walt, all of you, thank you so much for making this happen. I'm thrilled. I had a question. Did you mention, Will, over one of our lines, that there was no physical evidence of a fire in the building as well? when they did the reconstruction, there was no charcoal or burning wood?
No, I've never heard of any evidence found. All we know is there are newspaper reports that the old building was, this is on the subject of starting the new construction, the old building was torn down about 1911. I have never seen any indication of charred wood or anything like that.
And
So it's my
this
understanding
building was
that-
planned quite carefully, not into a rush job because the other clubhouse was due to burn or need replacement or something like that. It was planned years in advance of the,
Well, it was planned.
the fundraising began, I'd say, years ago.
That's another subject which we're going to talk about one of these days, the history of the Yacht Club, but new presentation, but not today. So, anything else?
Yeah.
is actually on Zoom. She joins via Zoom.
Showings on Zoom.
She joined us on Zoom.
You missed out on the free
How
morning.
many people are on Zoom? Kevin?
That's,
We have about 10 people.
10 people on Zoom.
okay.
I've got a question. I got two. I got to say, one is I understood that the Pneumonia Alley was part of the original construction and was not demolished.
That's right.
That's still true, okay?
Yes.
Pneumonia Alley was added to the old clubhouse in the 1890s, and it remained with the construction of the new building.
So it was not part of the original construction.
It wasn't part of the original construction, it was an addition to the old clubhouse, but the old clubhouse was only torn down to that level before this one was built.
That's one. Two is, are the photos available for us to publish in making like greeting cards or?
Yeah, on the smartphone, we actually have original clubhouse photos, and we've actually colorized some.
Do we need copyright release or anything?
Now, just click on the link to give us $5.
Send some money.
You personally,
No, it's goes to the regular.
It's bullshit.
But seriously, they're out there.
Okay,
Most of the photos are actually closed.
There's a photo gallery.
I see that, yeah.
That will link you to what we have so far.
And all these photos are in that gallery? All the ones that are in this room?
Not all of them. Well, what's interesting is we have hundreds of negatives from the 1900s, and we want to go negative to digital and bypass the prints that have been damaged and aged. So it'll just get better.
Good. Well, thank you very much, committee. You're doing a great job.
Okay, I see the hand up.
That was very exciting. Thank you all for your hard work. It's just a resource. I wanted to ask you about all the rowboats. There's probably a different name to them that we see when we come in on the ground level and what their background and how they can do it. We kind of work with each other. That they're the storage. Trying to dig back. Some digging back.
Okay, what?
The digging back.
The digging racks, those racks also were built prior to this building. They were built as part of the old clubhouse in the 1890s, and it's part of the remains from that.
They're all privately owned by members. They rent that space.
That's right.
She wanted to know where they all came from, but they're privately owned and by different members, and they pay a rental fee for being stored down there. So you can get on the wait list if there's none available if you wanted to put it on.
Okay, anything else?
I have a question. It's my understanding that this beautiful room started as a sail loft. Now, are all sail lofts this beautiful?
This was built as part of when they built this clubhouse in 1912. It was a tradition among the Corinthians to have their hijinks or logians, whichever. These were kind of a vaudeville type entertainment. They apparently loved to do that. And so when they built this building, they added a space up here. They built stage and so forth for that reason. Okay, but it also served as a sale loft. This is where they would bring their sales and hang them to dry.
This was a big issue when the sales were canvas.
That's right.
It took a long, people would not put their good sales on the boat if it's going to be wet out. They'd save them. So the issue of drying canvas sales was a big problem. So they would hang them in here if there was no ability to.
That's correct. Okay, yes.
So could I add something to that very quickly? Because it's a story I can tell constantly. This beautiful room is quite beautiful. One of the reasons it's beautiful is look at the floors. Okay, this floor was installed by John Culver when he was refurbishing the club, refurbishing his finances and so on. And he told me over lunch one day that he had this floor installed and then billed it to his company, a New York-based real estate company where he was an executive. And he told them that they paid for this floor years later. This is a Culver floor.
I add a little bit to that.
Yes, sir.
Years back, and I can't remember how many years, I was fourth captain. And the fourth captain, as what Brad knows, is in charge of the facility. And the board of directors, the floor was in bad shape. The floor, and the board of directors decided they were going to carpet it. And I said to myself, that can't be true, that you can't do that. So I got a hold of the people we had working for us, like Armando, and it wasn't that Armando at that time. And we got a hold of the sander, who will be sanded the floor down, and we put a basketball floor on it. And what has not true, that I don't know. But if I had been here, you would have been sitting there.
Looking at up here is actually the construction of the stage. This is one of the only photos, we were going through all of our articles and photos. This is one of the very few photos that we actually have of the construction of our stage. So we wanted to get that up on the website. It's pretty, built in 1912, you can see how it's constructed on the back. Yes.
And guess where we found this picture? In the Telltale. Yes. It was just, that's why I'm saying, look at the Telltale, because you never know what can come out. All of a sudden, there's this picture. And here it is.
Okay, there's a couple of questions from the first one is, we are curious to hear about how the building of the Golden Gate Bridge impacted the club and if there were any interesting artifacts discovered around that period.
Yeah, I'd say there are a couple of stories that have to do with access to the club. When the club was first built, Tiburon was a great location because it was very frequent ferry boat service to Tiburon, right over there. Because there was a railroad, commuter railroad, that for passenger ferries. So 4 or 5 times a day there were regular boats, and when the club had special events, they would contract with the railroad to run special boats. So, for instance, on the night of opening day or closing day, when there's the jinx after the big party and whatever, they'd run a midnight boat back to the city for the Corinthian members. So that they could, because again, they all lived over there. This was just their temporary hangout on weekends. When the railroads consolidated, when the Sausalito Railroad and the Tiburon Railroad consolidated, they moved all passenger service to Sausalito. So all of a sudden, access to Tiburon became a problem. And there was a strong lobbying effort by the club to get the railroad to run more frequent Tiburon boat service because they dropped it off. They didn't succeed in that. There was a secondary service. So to get to the club, between the time when the railroads merged and the construction of the bridge, you had to take the ferry to Sausalito, then take the little ferry, the sort of sub-ferry that came over to Tiburon to even get to the club. So that was a big issue.
What year?
I'm trying to remember when the railroad, that was early, 1900-ish time?
1910.
1910? Okay. Yeah. So then until the construction of the bridge, that was the only way you got to the club. So that's what happened. Now, gradually, of course, membership, Marin County population went up. Members weren't always quite so San Francisco centric, but it was still an issue. With the creation of the bridge, of course, all that went away. My grandparents, who were lifetime members, they lived in San Francisco, then they moved to San Mateo, and they would just drive up here every weekend with no big deal. So all through but in the 30s, before that happened, it was a bit of a timing struggle. There's lots of stories about people who would get trapped, having missed the last boat to one way or the other. Now, by the 30s, of course, they were car ferries, auto ferries. So you wouldn't have to get off and just come as a back in the early days, you weren't driving your car on the ferry boats. You were coming just like on the boats that serve the bay today. They were just passenger ferries, purely. But by the 30s, it was just an intermittent, slow car service. And then by 37, when the bridge opened, you could just drive it. I don't know if any particular, it probably had to look on the demographics and membership of the club, but I don't know of any other sort of historical artifacts that we may have that relate to that.
We have about it.
Yeah. But access to the club was an issue over time. Evolved.
And then the other question was that website that, and I might have typed it wrong, CIChistory.org.
Yes.
And do you have to register for that website, or is it should be free access?
It's free access.
Great. Those are the only questions I've had from Zoom.
Okay, anything else?
Thank you so much.
Feel free to come over and look at the artifacts over here. Make sure you can touch them, pick them up and, flip them over and stuff, because I know Walt got the postcard from